A smart lady, too. She's a doctor. Hey, Dr. Rabia De Latour is joining us tonight. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Of course.
We were laughing because our operator tonight is Aisha. I'm here. Some of the ladies behind me are. So I feel like it's just ladies' night in the newsroom. And then here you
I love it. I'm here for it.
All right. So we're talking about spring illnesses, spring viruses, and then, of course, them mixed with allergies. I don't know about you. I know you have kids, but all of a sudden, I'm seeing a surge of flu in my son's friends group, and people are talking about, is it COVID? Is it flu? I said, I thought this was a winter thing. But apparently they're all coming back around again.
So flu season is not over yet. Flu season extends into April, sometimes even into May in extreme cases, but we're still seeing flu. In fact, even the week ending in March 21st, we saw 8 pediatric deaths from flu. So flu is still active and the rates are still high in some states. But the good news is it's winding down. Flu season is winding down. It's absolutely winding down. And we're seeing numbers dropping significantly across the country, but it's still present. So it's still something to kind of take precautions. And the biggest thing you can do is if you are sick, to stay home and not expose other people. And to your earlier point about seasonal allergies versus flu versus these other respiratory illnesses, the biggest distinction is fever. You should not get a fever if you have seasonal allergies. Despite that, a lot of the other symptoms overlap: runny nose, cough, people feel congested, and it's hard to tell sometimes the difference. But fever is a big distinguishing factor.
So if you've got the fever, you likely do not have allergies, or maybe you have allergies, but it's not the number one pressing concern. There's something else at play.
Absolutely. So yes, fever is definitely a big distinguishing factor.
So I'm curious because so many of us, either our kids were required to get the flu shot, in November, or they chose to get the flu shot, or maybe they didn't. I'm curious how the flu shot is matched up with A and B now that we're so late in the season, because I try to wait until as close to Thanksgiving as possible to get my kids the flu shot, hoping that it has some effect later on in the year. But at least for my oldest, I mean, he had flu A for Christmas, and now it's spring break, and he's got flu B.
So every year, the flu vaccine covers 3 to 4 variants based on predictive models. And so it's really hard to be exactly precise with which flu you're covering with your vaccine and then what ends up being the predominant strain. For the most part, we end up getting good coverage. But sometimes we're wrong. And in that case, you don't always have the best coverage. Now, that being said, even though influenza A is decreasing across the country, influenza B tends to peak later, and that's what we're seeing as well. And so, like I said, flu season isn't over. It's still kind of ongoing, but the good news is it is winding down. So if you've got your flu vaccine, a lot of people like to get it as late as possible, around Thanksgiving. That's what Dr. Fauci does as well, to try to get that protection well into flu season and the end of it. That is a great, I think, technique to utilize. And, it's a wise thing to do.
Oh, so what about COVID and RSV? I also think of them, at least RSV, as more of a winter virus. But we've been doing stories as well that is also on the rise.
So COVID itself is still at a very low level, relatively speaking, especially when we compare it to, a few years back. And the concern and the seriousness and severity of COVID as well is significantly lower than it used to be. But we are still keeping very heavy tabs on COVID. And the latest news is the new variant, which is called the cicada variant. And that variant, which was first detected in South Africa in 2024, has now been found in 23 different states in the US. First, it was found in a traveler from the Netherlands. Then they swabbed 4 additional travelers. They started to find it in wastewater from planes. And then they found it in wastewater, like I said, in 23 different states in the United States. So those numbers, while still very small, it makes up 0.2% of the COVID cases. It's rising. And so it's definitely concerning enough that we're keeping close tabs on it. And the problem with the cicada variant of COVID is that it has 70 to 75 mutations in what's called the spike protein. And that is actually showing in labs to help it really evade protection from people's immunity, whether they have immunity from a vaccine or from previous infection. This new variant is evading those. And so that's why it's concern to, ID specialists, infectious disease doctors, myself, other doctors who are keeping tabs on things like this.
Does it present, how does this variant present in terms of illness? I mean, especially when we're talking about trying to figure out, does your kid have RSV? Does your kid have the flu? Is it COVID? And again, we're almost in April. So I think that a lot of parents are like, what gives? Is this a bad cold or does this one actually have a name?
Yeah, I think with all of these respiratory illnesses, the symptoms are all very similar, right? You can get cough, runny nose, sometimes fever. And in the case of flu, you can also get, body chills, muscle aches, and whatnot. So it's hard to distinguish one from the other. And that's why if you're concerned enough, most people will resolve, the virus will resolve on its own, especially in the case of RSV, which is another virus you mentioned. They'll resolve on their own. You don't really need medical attention or treatment, but you have vulnerable populations who are at higher risk for complications. So if you're worried at all, go to your doctor and get tested and figure out which one of these things it is, because it's relatively easy to get tested and figure out which one of these respiratory illnesses you can get. And yes, I completely agree. As a parent, it is extremely agitating that we're still seeing these. We're like, can summer come already? I want this kind of respiratory illness season to end. But the good news is it's winding down across the board for all of the illnesses we just talked about.
That is good news. All right, we'll leave it there and we'll let you get back to your vacation. Dr. Rabia, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Happy spring break to you and
Thank
your
you.
family.